The Vietnam War was terribly fought. A big part of this was the rules of engagement that they defined for pilots. Despite having Operation Rolling Thunder and others where it was constantly bombarding North Vietnam, the entire thing was really poorly done, and that was for one reason, right? This is the middle of the Cold War. They are terrified of starting World War III. They do not want the Russians to directly get involved in Vietnam, even though the Russians were there assisting. There was Russian pilots later on that it was determined that there was Russian pilots flying in the air shooting down Americans. There was also Russians operating the surface-to-air missiles, the SAM sites that the Americans would either get shot down by or were trying to destroy. However, there was this whole wink, wink, nod, nod, nobody accepting it, but the Americans were more especially afraid of taking the life of a Russian and then causing World War III. And then the other part of that is they were afraid that the Chinese would get involved, similar to the Korean War, which caused all kinds of havoc. So the United States, with the exception of bombing runs and the occasional Black Ops operation, never passed the demilitarized zone. The North Vietnamese army, on the other hand, was constantly crossing and going through, normally through Laos and Cambodia, to then go into South Vietnam. And now there was also missions into Laos and Cambodia to try and stop this. However, people did not like that. Now I could talk endlessly about what happened with the Vietnam War because it went for years, so I could talk literally for years about how dumb this is, and I probably will. LBJ especially, doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff during the Vietnam War, like calling up the enemy to tell them where the Americans were going to attack so that they could try and get the Russians out of the way and not create an international incident that would lead to World War III and a nuclear apocalypse, was one of the many things that caused some problems. People constantly badmouth Nixon. However, Nixon was able to end the Vietnam War because he then started going after these sites, not telling the Russians, and then doing other things like mining, as in mining the harbors and the bays around here to prevent the Chinese and the Russians from bringing in supplies via the sea routes, then helped reduce the amounts of equipment that North Vietnam actually had to then pursue the war.